All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Commander John Hooper, the new Hampton Roads Commandery Commander. By way of quick background, I have been a companion of the Naval Order of the U.S. for over 30 years and served as the commander of the National Capital Commandery up in Washington, D.C. prior to this for about 4 years as well. I hope to apply some of my experience gained up in Washington with the National Capital Commandery to our newly renovated, reinvigorated Hampton Roads Commandery as well. Most of you should have received the email that I sent out early in December, which discussed how we plan to revitalize the Hampton Roads Commandery. To that end, our core working group has been busy with refining some of the basics that are foundational to getting the Commandery up and running again. I had hoped that we could have had our first meeting in person, and indeed, we had booked a room at the Norfolk Yacht Club to do just that. But out of an abundance of caution dealing with the COVID issue, instead, we decided to hold a virtual meeting. This evening's meeting has 3 parts to it. First, recognition of our first honorary companion in the Hampton Roads Commander. Second, you will hear a presentation about the Naval Order's honorary flagship, the USS Constitution, which will be given by Captain Chris Melhuish, who is her 65th commanding officer. And finally, highlights of what we plan to accomplish in 2022. I'll save time at the end of the Zoom call for an open discussion. And please feel free to participate and share your thoughts and ideas with us. The main thing that I want to emphasize is that our programs should be fun and interesting. And that's the direction that we're going in. Here with us this evening is your new Commandery staff. Captain Melhuish, who is my Vice Commander, Master Chief Dr. Paul Reed, our Commandery Treasurer, and Captain Kate Gray, who is our Public Affairs Officer, and our Program Director tonight, putting all this together. Also joining us tonight, I believe, is one of our distinguished senior companions in the Hampton Roads Commandery, Admiral Jim Loy, U.S. Coast Guard retired, one of our former U.S. Coast Guard commandants. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And with that, let the program begin. Well, it is with pleasure, but also with great sadness, that I announce the induction of our first honorary companion. Mr. Wesley Smith was to join us tonight on Zoom, but he unexpectedly passed away last month, just 6 days after he was inducted into the Naval Order of the U.S. His obituary was posted in the Virginia Pilot, and you may read it at your convenience on our Facebook page. He served in the famed underwater demolition teams, specifically Teams 21 and 22, stationed out at the Naval Amphibious Base here in Hampton Roads. Wesley was a qualified second-class diver, scuba diver, and Navy parachutist. Mr. Smith enlisted in the United States Navy in 1948. However, prior to that, he served in the New York Army Guard and then the U.S. Army Air Corps. He did 2 shipboard assignments and was rated as a commissaryman, what we call today storekeepers. One of those shipboard tours took him north of the Arctic Circle. He applied for and completed his UDT training in 1954 and then reported to UDT Team 21 for duty. Petty Officer Smith and his teams served on board many ships and submarines over the course of his time as a Navy frogman. One of his interesting Navy assignments was supporting NASA's Mercury Gemini space capsule water recoveries. And Wesley met and helped train some of our most famous pioneering astronauts. His last tour of duty before he retired from the U.S. Navy in 1966 was with UDT Team 22. Petty Officer Smith was a lifelong member of the UDT SEAL Association. As I mentioned earlier, we had planned to present Mr. Smith with his honorary Naval Order of the U.S. membership during this Zoom, but this sadly was not to be. but recognizing that he was fading quickly and given the isolation he had been placed under in the hospital, we decided to present his certificate to his family so that they could share that with him at an appropriate time. Our vice commander contacted the family and arranged to present Mr. Smith's certificate to his daughter, Jackie. This could not have happened without the superb assistance of Captain Chris Carlock and others in the Naval Order. Mr. Smith's family has joined us tonight in the Zoom. And so, on behalf of the Naval Order, please accept our condolences as well as our respect for a great American sailor. I hope that you are comforted by our decision to induct Wesley into our honor roll. He will always be a companion. Some of Mr. Smith's family have joined us tonight, and I would like to ask Miss Jackie Smith to say a few words on behalf of the Smith family. Jackie?
We're very thankful for the work that you've put into this to honor my father, and I wish that he was here to accept this. So on his behalf, and my mother is present, we just want to thank you so much for the kindness that you've shown to our family during this challenging time, and not having a service to honor my father. This has tremendous special meaning to us that you have honored my father in this way. We are very, very grateful. He'll always be our hero. So thank you, and I'll turn that back over to you.
Thank you, Jackie. And as I mentioned before, it's an honor and a privilege to have your entire family join us tonight and to be a part of our Naval Order assemblage here. Our speaker tonight for the program happens to be our Vice Commander. Captain Chris Melhuish first joined the Naval Order in 2001 and lobbied the Naval Order Congress to adopt the USS Constitution as the Order's honorary flagship, which was accomplished in 2003. In parallel, he sought the Order's endorsement to have the ship designated by the U.S. Congress as our nation's ship of state, an initiative that Captain Melhuish formulated while he commanded the ship from 1997 to 1999. The Naval Order helped lobby for this initiative, and in 2009, Congress enacted this unique designation. But you'll hear more about America's ship of state momentarily. Chris was commissioned in 1979 and served as a surface warfare officer on board a number of ships, including a guided missile frigate, 3 destroyers, 2 amphibious ships, and during Desert Storm, on board an aircraft carrier. Ashore, he graduated with honors from the U.S. Naval War College. He served as a senior U.S. government representative in Gibraltar. He spent a year as a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. And he finished up his career by spending 17 years on the fleet headquarters staff here in Norfolk, first on active duty, and then later as a civil servant. So Chris, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Hu, for that very kind introduction. And again, may I just also offer my condolence to the whole Smith family. I did meet your dad, and I was just very impressed with him, just truly a great American. I'm not an historian, but so this presentation tonight is really a personal voyage, a reflection of my experience with the Constitution, both during command, and then as I've learned more about the ship over the years. When I served on the ship, I first reported before my change of command, and the commanding officer at the time asked if I could be his officer of the deck during the ship's historic sail, which you can see right there. I'm actually standing on the side of the ship somewhere in that photograph. And that was in July 1997. So shortly after I took command, from July to October 1997, I received over 600,000 visitors, and during the entire command tour, about 1.5 million visitors. And so that was pretty cool. There are not too many Navy officers who get to interact with the public on that basis. The ship celebrates her birthday every year on the 21st of October, and she turns a very young 225 years old this year. So if I were to speak 1 minute for every year of her existence, you would be forced to listen to me for the next 3.5 hours. So I'm going to be like the reduced Shakespeare Company. I'll zip through these slides. I've got my timer going, so hopefully we'll wrap this up in about 35 minutes. But at the end of this, I really want you guys to sort of understand why the ship is still here, its relationship with the American people, and especially school kids, and why the decision was made by the United States Congress to designate her uniquely as America's ship of state. So she's an icon, and some of the things flashing up on your screen are just a small sampling of Old Ironsides memorabilia, postage stamps, movies, clocks, scrimshaw, tobacco tins, the National Geographic magazine, John Philip Sousa, and items from her 1930s national tour. And there's a pin that was given out. But the really neat thing is the ship has a special international cachet. Here's a picture taken in Pimlico, London. The Brits actually honor the Constitution. This is a pub in London itself. So the ship is a commissioned warship. It's not a museum ship. It has an active duty crew of sailors, blue jackets, and officers and chief petty officers that currently number about 70. And I'm thinking that the crew is going to probably grow to about 90 over the next couple of years, at least talking to the current commanding officer. And speaking of the current commanding officer, unless you were on another planet, you would not have, everyone must know by now that this person, Commander B.J. Farrell, is now the first female to command the ship. And this really blew away America, and it blew away a lot of international media. So she's quite the rock star. My presentation really has about 4 parts. One is, how did she get to be called Old Ironsides? And then the second part is her gradual slide into decay, then restoration, which lasted for about 90 years, and then ship of state. So that's kind of how I've structured my presentation tonight. She was launched in Boston on the 21st of October, 1797. The Old North Church is actually that church between the foremast and the mainmast. Her first commanding officer was Samuel Nicholson. The first death on the ship was Samuel Nicholson's son, and he's buried down here in St. John's Episcopal Church over in Hampton. He died of yellow fever. The ship was named actually by President George Washington, one of the 6 original frigates. A lot of people actually seem to think the ship's sides are made of iron, but really not. It's made of live oak, white oak, and various other kinds of woods. She draws 2,000 tons, 23 feet. The height of her mainmast above the water is about 190 feet, so she's really magnificently tall. When she had a full suit of canvas, she had over an acre of canvas, of almost double the size of what the Coast Guard Bark Eagle carried. So it was a phenomenal spread of canvas. She carried about 38 officers, 375 sailors, and about 60 Marines during her heyday. Oh, and the copper sheathing that you see there in the slide, that's about 12 tons of copper. So here's another view of the ship. This is actually a ship's model, and you can look at, so the spar deck is the upper deck. It's exposed to the elements. The guns along the side there are carronades, shorter guns. The next deck down is the gun deck, and you can actually, if you look, you can see on the left-hand side a model of a 24-pounder gun. And then if you look very closely, you can actually see the sort of the laminate, the very thick side of the ship, where you have thick planks on the inside, thick planks on the outside, and these vertical timbers that are all stitched together to form this almost impenetrable wall of wood. On the gun deck back aft is where the captain's cabin, my cabin, was located, and the berth deck down below that was where the ship's wardroom, this is where the officers had their quarters, and then forward of them, the enlisted men would rig their hammocks, and then below that was the orlop deck, and then below that was the hull. So that's kind of the structure. A lot of the ship was actually below water. The ship existed really for one thing, and that was to carry combat to an enemy ship, and she was very heavily armed. She was rated a 44-gun frigate, but actually she carried 55 guns, so 30 24-pounders, and you can see the effective range of a 24-pounder down in the box. Same thing with the 32-pounder carronades, and carried about 16 tons of gunpowder. So quite the spry young woman in her heyday. Here's a picture of the gun deck from aft looking forward, the starboard side. Each of those guns weighs 3 tons. And so then you'd say, well, how are the guns operated in combat, you know, with all that noise and everything else? And that's actually an interesting question if you were to ask it. So the Navy basically organized itself by divisions. This was a system created in the mid-1750s by the Royal Navy and adopted by the United States Navy. And here's an actual quarter bill for gun number 12, which is back aft on the gun deck. And with about, I think, 12 men, plus a powder monkey. The powder monkey's name was Peter Furnace, which is ironic since why would you have that surname when you're carrying high explosives around? And about, if you look closely at the quarter bill, you'll see that about 4 of the men have a first name called William. So here's the berth deck. You can see the hammocks rigged. Here's the cockpit. This is where the master's mates lived and where the surgeon would chop off limbs of people when he was operating. In 1803, excuse me, the ship departed for the Mediterranean. And this was engaged in the First Barbary War. The Barbary War ended in 1805, and the Treaty of Peace was actually signed on the Constitution, which is pretty cool. The guy commanding the ship at the time trained these officers, and all but one of them ended up commanding the Constitution in a ship's history. The odd man out was Lawrence in the middle. These were named as Preble's boys, and he trained them well. And we will see more of Hull, Bainbridge, and Stewart in this presentation. The Naval Order recognized the accomplishments of the United States Navy in the Mediterranean during the First Barbary War. And in Valletta Harbor, Malta, in 2019, the Naval Order, the National Capital Commandery, based in Washington, D.C., was able to get funds to erect this plaque. And so there you can see it. It overlooks the harbor where the Constitution was moored in the early, excuse me, early 1800s. So let's go and figure out how she got to be called Old Ironsides, because before the War of 1812, she wasn't. At the outbreak of the War of 1812, the British had a very dim opinion of the United States Navy, and in one newspaper, the London Evening Star, it considered the United States Navy as sort of a piece of striped bunting, i.e. the flag, flying at the mastheads of a few fur-built frigates, fur-built as opposed to oak, heavy oak, manned by a handful of bastards and outlaws. Well, that was pretty disparaging, although they had probably a right to say that, since at the time, the United States Navy was minuscule compared with the Royal Navy, about 17 warships, compared with about 900 warships belonging to the Royal Navy. But actually, what a lot of people may not realize is that the United States were pretty adaptive and pretty flexible. And at the outbreak of the war, and then throughout the war, we actually were able to recruit about 500 civilian ships called privateers. And these privateers took over 2,000 prizes, which actually created quite a dent in British mercantile trade. Also, at the time, just as a tip of the hat to our Coast Guard, the Coast Guard antecedents was the Revenue Cutter Service, and they had 16 cutters from the Revenue Service serving at the time. So Paul Hamilton was the Secretary of the Navy, and he issued orders to the commanding officer of the ship at the time, Isaac Hull, to get underway. This was on the day that war was declared in June of 1812, and sortie out of the Chesapeake Bay and sail up to Sandy Hook, New York, and rendezvous with a guy called Commodore Rogers and join his squadron of about 5 ships. So Isaac Hull said, "Roger that," and started taking on stores. So what went into the stores of a warship, a frigate, a United States Navy frigate at the time? So roughly about 50,000 gallons of water. And we had actually substituted whiskey for rum at the time, so about 5,000 gallons of rum. And so you can see bread, biscuit. This is not soft biscuit. It's actually, this is what it looks like. This is a ship's biscuit. It's almost exactly the same dimension as a sandwich thin, but if you were to throw it at someone, it would probably knock them out. It was so hard. It's like a piece of wood. They would actually grind this up with the back of a mallet or something and make it into a powder and then push that into a stew. So pretty unedible. So Isaac Hull sailed north and he spotted a squadron of ships. He made the private signals and then the wind died. And then at that point, he realized that it was not a US Navy squadron, but it was a Royal Navy squadron of 7 ships. And it was commanded by this guy in the upper left, Captain Veer Brooke. He actually killed James Lawrence, which was the captain, the one captain in that slide of Preble's Boys when he captured USS Chesapeake. That was the next year. So Isaac Hull puts all his canvas up, and remember that the Constitution's canvas was way, way larger than anything the Royal Navy frigates carried. And Veer Brooke was in HMS Shannon there on the left-hand side of the screen. And Isaac Hull put all of his boats in the water and told his men to row. And so they were at general quarters or action stations for over 60 hours straight. And then the puff of wind caught up, and Isaac Hull was able to escape. This made national news as an example of superior U.S. naval seamanship. So in a month after that, this is Isaac Hull. He's cruising off Newfoundland or off Halifax, off the coast of Canada, and he spies a sail. And it turns out to be actually one of the ships in Captain Veer Brooke's squadron, but it's all alone by itself, and it's HMS Guerriere. And so in this painting, which Isaac Hull commissioned by Michel Félix Cornet, who was a renowned maritime artist at the time, if you look at the Guerriere's mainmast, you'll see that the sail looks like it's being pushed back by the wind, and that's being taken aback. And that actually was a deliberate sailing maneuver to stop the ship, and was also a signal to the oncoming enemy to say, bring it on, brother. You know, I'm ready for you. And if you look at the Constitution, you can see that they're actually taking in the sails, the upper sails, which are spelled top gallants, but pronounced tagantz. So they're taking that in and they're setting fighting sails. So there's a flurry of activity as Constitution is bearing down on the Guerriere. Isaac Hull tells his gun crews to wait, not fire, not fire, not fire. The Guerriere is firing its cannons at the Constitution. The cannonballs are bouncing off the sides, the thick sides of the Constitution. And if you look in this painting, you'll see on the Constitution's mainmast, a sail suddenly appears above the big sail. And that is where he's decided to sort of hit the accelerator and get an extra sort of boost. The Guerriere loses its mast, and then somehow Isaac Hull loses control of the Constitution. It backs in the Guerriere. Guerriere loses its mainmast. And in this confrontation here, the leader of the commander of the United States Marine Detachment on Constitution, and his name was William Bush, turns to Isaac Hull and said, "Shall I board the ship?" He was then shot through the head by a British sniper and died. So the interesting thing about William Bush is he is actually the first United States Marine Corps officer killed in combat for the United States of America, defending the Constitution. And so he's revered by the Marines. So the ship's nickname came about because some sailor apparently said, "Huzzay," not huzzah, but "Huzzay, her sides are made of iron." And that became her nickname, and that was in in August of 1812. This was captured by the Brits in the press, and they said never before in the history of the world did an English frigate strike or surrender to an American. And this really rattled British authorities. Now, this was also received with great acclaim by lots of American citizens, and so sort of as a tip of the hat to Jackie here, I found this, which is Hull's Victory. And so I'm just going to hit the advance, and you should be able to hear the music that goes with the words there. So it's a little difficult to follow, but let's try it. So people still dance to that, and it's good ale-thumping music. Later that year, Constitution gets a new commanding officer, and his name is William Bainbridge, another one of Preble's boys, and he captures HMS Java off the coast of Brazil. And then he's relieved soon after that by the third commanding officer during the War of 1812, and this guy is Charles Stewart. And this one was actually right after the war had officially ended. And this was probably Constitution's finest triumph during the War of 1812. She engaged 2 Royal Navy ships at the same time and captured both. So let's take a quick look at Charles Stewart. Actually, one of the Naval Order companions who was supposed to join with us tonight but was unable to, wrote a book about him. It's actually the first book written on Charles Stewart. It's A Call to the Sea, Captain Charles Stewart and the Constitution. And this was published in 2005. Charles Stewart served on active duty in the Navy for 63 years, and his grandson was Charles Stewart Parnell. And if you're Irish, you'll know that Charles Stewart Parnell was the uncrowned king of Ireland. So he's got some fairly interesting history behind him, and I won't spend any more time on Charles Stewart, but it's a very, very fascinating individual. So by the end of the war, the National Intelligencer, which was the equivalent of the Washington Post of its day, used the term, the national ship, our national ship, the Constitution, has become the nation's ship. And that was in 1815, but no one else did anything about it. There were 4 Congressional Gold Medals awarded to various commanding officers of the ship, Preble, Hull, Bainbridge, and Stewart. That's sort of an unbroken record for any particular ship in the United States Navy. So let me just fast forward a little bit to the 1820s. There was a huge upheaval in the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean. This was the Greek War of Independence, which I think was 1821 to 1829. And the United States Navy decided to park some ships over there just to sort of keep an eye on things. And that was the Mediterranean Squadron. And here's a painting of the Constitution going over there. You may have heard of this guy, Lord Byron, a dramatically famous person. This was actually painted 10 years before his visit in 1822, and he's dressed in ethnic Albanian garb. He actually died fighting for he's an Englishman, but he died fighting for the Greeks during their War of Independence. In 1830, word kind of got out that, well, the ship is old, and the Secretary of the Navy, John Branch, apparently, but I think this is probably fake news, had decided to dispose of the frigate Constitution. And that was written in the Boston Daily Advertiser. Well, that really got a lot of people excited, including this individual here, Oliver Wendell Holmes, who jotted down very quickly a poem which became an instant bestseller, as it were, in the United States. And I just will read through it. Old Ironsides. I tear her tattered ensign down, long has it waved on high, and many an eye has danced to see that banner in the sky. Beneath it rung the battle shout and burst the cannon's roar. The meteor of the ocean air shall sweep the clouds no more. Her deck, once red with heroes' blood, where knelt the vanquished foe, when winds were hurrying o'er the flood and waves were white below, no more shall feel the victor's tread, or know the conquered knee. The harpies of the shore shall pluck the eagle of the sea. Oh, better that a shattered hulk should sink beneath the wave. Her thunders shook the mighty deep, and there should be her grave. Nail to the mast her holy flag, set every threadbare sail, and give her to the god of storms, the lightning and the gale. And Wendell Holmes understood in that poem the relationship between the ship and the nation, which is if the nation wasn't going to take care of the ship, then the sea should take the ship. And I think that's a very profound kind of message. It really resonated with America. So now to the next thing. I'm just going to click through these because there's some interesting slides. She entered dry dock here on the left-hand side. This is the second oldest dry dock in the world. I'm sorry, second oldest dry dock in the United States. The oldest being down here in Portsmouth. And pieces of the ship were then taken off. There's, the copper sheathing was made into artifacts and sold off. Actually, wood from the ship was made into a carriage, which was presented to the President of the United States. So the precedent for taking bits of the ship and then giving it as sort of political gifts has been there for a long time. The ship sailed from Norfolk in 1844 and conducted its first round-the-world cruise. I just love this guy here. He's the commanding officer, Mad Jack Percival. He looks every inch. He was actually former enlisted, but he looks for every inch a sailor. So Mad Jack Percival took it all around the world and did so safely. And if you're Catholic, a lot of Catholics don't know this, but the first papal visit on U.S. sovereign territory was on board Old Ironsides in Gaeta Harbor, Italy, in 1849, and that was Pope Pius IX. So there you go. Her last prize taken was in 1853. It was a slave ship Gambrel. A lot of Americans also probably are not aware that the United States Navy was engaged in anti-slave trade patrol from 1819 to about 1859, so about 4 decades, trying to stop ships from coming to the Western world, carrying slaves. And obviously it was not that successful, but it is something the Navy should feel proud of. Here's the first picture of the ship. This is when her useful service life had sort of basically come to a stop, and she's being converted to a training ship. During the American Civil War, the ship was moved to Newport, Rhode Island to keep it out of the Southerners' hands. And a couple of years after the war ended, her commanding officer at the time was George Dewey from 1867 to 1870. And the reason why there's a little Naval Order logo there by his name is when he was Admiral of the Fleet, 5-star Admiral, he was inducted as a companion to the Naval Order. So there's a connection there that goes back at least that long. Here's the first and earliest recorded picture of the ship. And this is taken in Hampton Roads in 1881 off Fort Monroe. And her captain at the time was Captain Shepard. And I was sort of struck by looking at the painting that Michel Felice-Cornet did some 90 years earlier. And if you look at the shadows on the sails and the shadows on the sails in the photograph, you can get a really strong appreciation for the techniques, the artistic techniques of Michel Felice-Cornet as a maritime artist. She was taken up to the Navy shipyard in Portsmouth and then basically turned into a berthing barge. So that stuff dumped on top of her just created her into a dormitory for sailors and officers for officers. There's another picture of her, kind of looking pretty nasty. There's a picture on the inside, pretty unprepossessing. John F. Kennedy's grandfather, Honey Fitzgerald, decided to have the ship towed back to Boston, where she was launched back in time for its centennial. So here's a picture of the ship. She's finally safely back in Boston, and the Navy really pulled out all the stops for the centennial on the 21st of October, 1897. And that was that. And then so the ship continued to decay. Patriotic groups like the United States Daughters of 1812 decided to do fundraising to raise money to save the ship. And here's an example of a certificate that was a certificate of appreciation for someone who donated money, and this was in February of 1902. Well, the Secretary of the Navy at the time was actually a direct descendant of Napoleon Bonaparte. His name was Charles Joseph Bonaparte. Recommended to Congress to have the Old Ironsides towed out to sea and used as target practice and sunk by elements of the North Atlantic Fleet. Well, this made the Boston Globe, and then a short while after that, this Armenian American, he actually emigrated to the United States. This is an interesting story, the relationship between immigrants and people who are very passionately patriotic and the ship. He immigrated to the United States when he was 16. He couldn't speak a word of English. He had almost no money to his name. And then he became a very wealthy man, a very wealthy merchant in Boston. He offered $10,000 to the Secretary of the Navy to buy the ship. That translates to about $270,000 today. The Secretary of the Navy declined. He said, fine. He upped it to $15,000. And so this was captured by the Boston Globe, and Massachusetts went crazy. So here's the example of a broadside, a petition that was circulated. It was not asking for money. It was I want you to sign this document that we can send to the United States Congress to save the ship. So here's a picture of that scroll, that document. It's 170 feet long. 30,000 Massachusetts signatures were put on it, and it was done in 3 weeks. And here you can see it's rolled out on the floor of the United States Congress. Well, that got a lot of people's attention, so the ship was saved at that point. But also, probably the one reason was the President of the United States at the time was Theodore Roosevelt. When he was in his early 20s, he wrote the defining book on the Naval War of 1812. And so here's the first edition, and guess what's on the front cover? So neither the president nor the American people agreed with Seclamp's position. He went off to found essentially the beginning of the FBI, and they got a new Secretary of the Navy. So now we're into the sort of final section here, restoration. So there's the picture of the ship with all that garbage on the top removed. This is in 1907 in Boston. During the First World War, and this is something a lot of people don't know, Old Ironsides was renamed USS Old Constitution, and the name USS Constitution was to be a new battlecruiser, which is pictured there. And then basically, because the Washington Naval Treaty in 1922 scrapped the 4 battlecruisers, one of them was the USS Constitution, and so in 1925, Old Ironsides gets her name back. So a lot of people don't know that for 8 years she was not USS Constitution. A survey was done. About 85% of the structure was rotten. A pennies campaign started. The initial repair estimates thought, okay, we're going to need about $400,000 translates to about $5 million today. So they had 3 lines of effort. They decided to get the school kids involved, so they had a pennies campaign. They sold a lithograph on the right. That's Gordon Grant's lithograph for about $7 today. And souvenir sales. Campaign actually raised about about almost $700,000. Congress plussed up $300,000. All of that in total came out to about $14 million, which is how much it cost to fix the ship. Hollywood got involved. There was this movie called Old Ironsides. You can see it. It's a silent movie. It's pretty cool. Here's the ship in the shipyard, looking pretty sad. There are some pieces of the wood with plaques and so on and so forth. Now, in 1931, she appears like this new butterfly, and she's looking pretty good. The picture on the lower left is her in San Francisco Harbor. She was taken on a national tour, visited 76 ports in the United States. And here she is in Norfolk. And Norfolk's population was about half of what it is today. So if she had about 86,000 visitors back then over a 7-day period, so multiply that by 2. So imagine a frigate coming to waterside and getting 160,000 visitors in a week. That's pretty cool. So she's tied up by Harbor Park. Well, Harbor Park obviously didn't exist back then, but the location of Harbor Park today. And here is the commander and the mayor. The commander's looking down at the wreath, trying to figure probably where to put it, along with all the other wreaths. And there's the city attorney and the Norfolk mayor and the sailor back there, blue jacket smiling, big grin. And why is everyone smiling? Because prohibition was still the law in 1931. There was no alcohol in the grog tub. It was purely staged. The last time a U.S. president, serving president, actually set foot on the ship, and I find this still stunning to me, was President Hoover 90 years ago. Since then, no president of the United States, serving president, has set foot on Old Ironsides, which is truly an amazing thing. Here she is in the Panama Canal. She had 4.6 million visitors in a 35-month tour, which is an unbroken record. And FDR visited the yard in 1940, and then he directed the ship to be recommissioned again. And so her current commission, which is the 14th commission, dates to 1940, and that we can thank FDR for that. She's not a museum ship, because there's a museum next to the ship, that's Constitution Museum, which was opened in 1976. I went up to relieve this guy, who's probably one of the finest naval officers I've met, Mike Beck. He had this vision about sailing the ship for the first time in 116 years. Everyone thought he was nuts, but he said, this is what we're going to do, and he ultimately succeeded. So Kate and I my wife and I were on the ship. On this day and during the sail, this is in Marblehead the day before the sail, about almost 200,000 people were lining the shores to see the ship. The last time Old Ironsides was in Marblehead was in 1931, so it was brilliantly successful. Here's a kid who was offering me pennies for the ship. Just as a little sidebar here, Mike Beck, the guy that I relieved, told me that a few weeks before the sail, he did not have permission to sail the ship. He was summoned down to Washington, D.C. the vice chief of naval operations told him that he had changed his mind. He was not going to sail the ship. Mike Beck said, "What do we tell the school kids who've given all their pennies to buy the sails that are going to sail the ship?" And the VCNO thought about it and said, "Okay, sail the ship, but don't mess up." So that I'm just offering that as a real, very real example of the power of school kids in America. And here's a chart of the actual sail, the 2 green circles is the actual sail itself. And if you look at the masts and the spars on the picture on the right, you can actually get a sense of the real scale of the ship. Those are people actually standing on and working the sails. So it's a pretty large ship, actually. This meme has popped up in Facebook as here's a picture of Captain Jack Sparrow escaping from the United States Navy's clutches, and I thought that was kind of cute. But it gives you an idea of scale too. The Blue Angels flying 350 knots above the ship. The ship's doing 3.5 knots below. 2 frigates. In the United States Navy today, there's only 1 frigate, and that's the one on the right. Mike Beck said, "What's your vision for the ship?" So originally I thought, well, I'd like to take the ship down to New York. And for the 2000 International Naval Review, I had a Navy combat artist draw this up. That's me on the right during the sail as the officer of the deck. So these was kind of random thoughts that I had. And Boston had a different opinion about my vision. And so this was actually one of the local rags up there. And if you look at the expression on the Statue of Liberty up there, it's like, oh, this is mine. This is like a cat playing with a toy. You can't have this ship. This is mine. And so this was this ancient 400-year-old enmity between the city of New York and the city of Boston. I just put my foot in it all the way up. And then, anyway, there's a whole story about what I wanted to do, and the Chief of Naval Operations essentially closed the gate in 1998. So that red line of death, the ship can't leave Boston Harbor. So I started something up, which was getting the Chief Petty Officers to do Heritage Week, and that's been going since 1997. So here's a picture taken in 2005 with first-class petty officers who've been selected to Chief Petty Officer, and they spend time on the ship and just think about their heritage. I designed the uniforms and put that in, regularized that into U.S. Navy uniform regulations. This was really cool. I had a boat crew. They all wanted to do their training, and so this is being rowed in Marblehead. It's pretty cool. One of the things I learned is you actually don't have brakes. So once you get up in speed, it's really difficult to slow this thing down. Anyway, that's another story for a party somewhere. Started the gun drill and using 1815 period gun drill commands. So it really helped the sailors understand what it took to run a gun in and out. I had a transportable exhibit. This would be put on the back of an 18-wheeler and taken around the country. So Middle America, the West Coast, they could all see how the Navy was back then. But there's one more thing, which was how to formalize it. And so there was this line that went through my head about sail on, O ship of state, sail on. And so I thought in 1997 that the Constitution should be called America's Ship of State by act of Congress. And so I started that effort. And it wasn't until I got recruited by, or invited to join the Naval Order, that I found a sympathetic ear. We finally, in 2006, got the Secretary of the Navy at one of our congresses, Naval Order congresses, to endorse the idea. And then in 2009, the United States Congress finally did it. So this is what it says in law. The Constitution is designated as America's Ship of State. That's it. It's done. And in the United States Navy, which is really, really, really cool, the commanding officer of the Constitution reports directly to the Chief of Naval Operations. There's no other ship in the United States Navy, no other commanding officer of a ship in the United States Navy has that relationship. So that's pretty cool. So you saw this earlier, and what I wanted to do was close this loop that I thought a very bright journalist captured in 1815. And so I feel I've discharged my duty to that anonymous author who wrote that. So it becomes the nation's ship. So some observations in closing. Clearly, the bond between America and the ship is enormously powerful. It is very humbling to feel it. The ship, I think, speaks to commanding officers, perhaps not all. I really felt that she spoke to me, and I didn't want to let her down. The Navy made the ship's legend, clearly, but it's the American people who helped preserve her, and hopefully I was able to capture that in tonight's presentation. And don't mess with Old Ironsides. She always wins. There's no doubt in my mind about that. So William Bainbridge in 1831 wrote this: "May the citizens of this country in gratitude see that she, like her namesake and prototype, will never be forgotten." So hopefully that will never be. And so, Hoop, this concludes my presentation, sir.
Chris, that was absolutely outstanding. Ladies and gentlemen, would you join me in a nice, hearty round of applause for Captain Melhuish? Well, Chris, as you always do, you've inspired me again with this presentation, and motivated me to make another trip back up to Boston, and this time make sure that I get over to the Navy Yard and to the ship's museum and get aboard as well. I hope that all of you are equally inspired to make a trip to Boston to see our grand old lady. Well, Chris, thanks for your presentation. This evening was our inaugural program, first of 4 that are planned for this year. We are hopeful that our future programs on the U.S. Marine Corps' defense of Midway Island in the Pacific that we're going to hold in June. Also, the search for and the discovery of the U.S. revenue cutter Bear that we have planned for August. And that'll be followed by our annual meeting in September, which we are hopefully encouraged will be able to be done in person. We're looking forward to that. The annual Naval Order Congress, which occurs every year, obviously, is currently scheduled for 20th through the 22nd of October, and that will be held up in Washington, D.C. area this coming October, most likely in Arlington. When the details of that are finalized, we'll make sure that you all have those as well so that you can join us up there. As opportunities and other organizations share their information and their programs with us, we will promulgate that information to you as well. We're well connected with several of the Naval Maritime History Museums in the area, the Hampton Roads area here. And we will be sharing their programs with all of you as well. Well, thank you for your continued affiliation with the Naval Order. And it looks like we've got a new, Chris, it looks like we've got a bunch of new potential recruits here in the audience. And in your affiliation with the Hampton Roads Commandery as well. I look forward to meeting all of you in person soon. With that said, let me stop talking and open the floor for any open discussion. And to avoid people from talking over each other, just raise your hand to be acknowledged if you have any questions. And Captain Gray and Captain Melhuish and I will be happy to answer your questions. Kate, go ahead.
Everyone is able to unmute themselves now. So if you'd like to say anything, you're welcome to.
I guess I'll say, can you guys hear me? Okay, hi, I'm Tony Sanchez, retired Chief Master at Arms. I'm up in Northern Virginia right now, just got to work, still in my uniform, but happy to be here and looking forward to seeing all of you in person.
Good.
And great presentation, I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Tony, thank you for joining us. And also, I see you're with U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So thank you for what you do as well. An incredibly difficult job right now. So we're proud to have you with us tonight.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
So for Barbara, are you really in Hawaii?
No.
Alabama. As is Lauren and Tracy. They're both in Alabama.
So just if I could add to what Hoop said, what we're trying to do with the Hampton Roads Commandery is it's relatively old. I mean, the Naval Order goes back to what, 1890. There were a lot of things like the Sons of American Revolution, Daughters of American Revolution, Naval, they're all around about the 1890s, and that was for a particular reason. And so down here in the Hampton Roads district, it kind of putzed out after a while. And so what we're trying to do is to put a little bit of intellectual effort into this and change it a little bit, you know, change our focus a little bit and start to recruit as many people as we can and make this an interesting and viable commandery. Frankly, since this is the world's largest aggregation of Coast Guardsmen, sailors, Marines, merchant mariners, we really, there's no reason why we could not have a very large commandery here. And the larger it becomes, you know, the more sophisticated the program will have to be. So we're at sort of infant steps here. We just want to put together and make sure we have the right building blocks and then just take off with it. So, but thank you for joining us.
By the way, as I mentioned very briefly, we've got some pretty notable people who are part of the Naval Order. And of course, that was started back in July of 1890 with Admiral of the Navy, Commodore George Dewey as well, the famed admiral who led the naval attack on the Spanish-American War in Manila as well. And we've got several generals and admirals here in the Norfolk Hampton Roads area, which are members. And our current Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, is a very, very active member of the National Capital Commandery of the Naval Order up in Washington. And he is currently the Secretary of the Navy. We're proud to have him in our ranks. And so we're always looking for new recruits. We hope that some of you will join us, or maybe even know somebody who has an interest in naval history that should be joining us.
Speaking of which, do you want me to put up contact information here?
Chris, if you would, that would be terrific, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
So in the interim, while Chris is bringing up the contact information for the officers in the commandery, as he indicated, we are revitalizing the commandery and getting back up and on our feet. And we are always anxious to receive and hear about any new ideas, areas for improvement. And so if any of you have a thought that comes to mind about some potentially interesting programs or speakers, or some things that we could do to broaden our audience, do not hesitate to let us know.
No, I'm sorry.
Well, I think the important thing is that the Naval Order's website is very, very good. And it's just at www.navalorder.org. So really easy to remember.
Before we close, I wanted to let everybody know that we have quite an outreach program as well. And coming up this spring, starting here in about 6 weeks, is a National History Day competition throughout the 50 states and territories. And part of that National History Day program is a competition where students from 8th grade to 12th grade will have an opportunity to do the research and create a project centered around an annual theme that the National History Day puts out each spring around this time. And the students compete with their entries at the local level, and then at the regional level, and then at the state level, and finally at the national level as well. And typically every year, because the Naval Order does present an award to a 9th through 12th grader, as well as a 6th through 8th grader. Typically every year here in Virginia, we get anywhere from 15 to 20 different entries from these middle school and high school students who decide to write about a particular piece of naval history that centers around the annual theme. So in April, specifically April 23rd and 24th, is when Virginia will have their contest as part of the National History Day contest. And the Hampton Roads Commandery of the Naval Order and the National Capital Commandery provide judges that go down to Richmond, to the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. And we take a look at specifically the naval history, naval maritime history entries that have been submitted and have won their way all the way to the state level. And we pick a first and a senior level award and a junior level award as well. And that is primarily to help engender interest by our youth in naval history. And the winners of that contest in a variety of areas, the winners of that contest will go on to the national contest, which is held up in the Baltimore area at the University of Maryland, the global campus. And they will compete against 50 of their competitors and come away with the first and second prize up there. So we are also reaching out to our youth to interest them in naval history, naval maritime history. And that's something that we've done for about 12 years now. And it's grown in size and also in notoriety. Well, does anybody have any other thoughts or recommendations? Any questions? Well, thank you all for your time and attention tonight. I hope you enjoyed the program. I really did. I thought I knew a lot about the Constitution, and every time I talked to Chris, I learned something new about the ship. But thank you all for your time and attention tonight. And Kate, I guess we're ready to wrap it up.